Hi everybody. I am sorry that I can't be there, but I'm actually in lovely Lutruwita, Tasmania. And I just want to start by acknowledging the Palawa and Palakani peoples of Lutruwita, upon whose land I am today, and acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands across Australia and pay my deep respects to elders past and present. So as Michael said, I manage the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training, and that kind of stands for ADCET. What we say is ADCET. ADCET's been around for about 20 years. It's a web-based resource, but probably in the last 8 years, we've actually branched out to more professional development and developing a lot more guidelines and contents to support the whole tertiary sector. Our ultimate aim is to improve access and participation for people with disability in the tertiary sector. And when I use the word tertiary, that talks about higher education and vocational education and training, as Michael said. And yeah, so we kind of realised that when we first started, probably 20 years ago, we were really focusing on the disability practitioners, which Michelle, who's talking today, manages those individuals within the University of Newcastle. So our information was predominantly for them. But over the years, we've realised that to ensure that access and participation is as inclusive as possible for students with disability, we need to also inform the teachers and academics within those settings, and also inform students around their rights and responsibilities. So we've developed a whole range of content that actually is targeted at the teachers, at academics, at the students, and at the disability practitioners. So at the moment, the website focuses on those three areas, but we have lots of other content around that. So it's sometimes I look at the website and think, oh, I feel like it's a bit like my brain. There's so much in there. But we've done some wonderful things that really do support students with disabilities, especially students who are blind or have a vision impairment, in the last year or so. And I just wanted to showcase or highlight some of those today for the audience. One of the things, and many of you would be aware, that the NDIA, or National Disability Insurance Scheme, was launched a number of years ago. And you know, this is a game changer for many people with disability. It's one of the biggest social policy pieces of work that the government undertook, probably since Medicare. And that kind of brought some really positive experiences for people with disability, but then it also brought some new challenges. And one of those challenges was when you're actually accessing tertiary education, who's responsible to fund what? And that was kind of a question that was asked probably for a couple of years when NDIA or NDIS started. So what is the university meant to fund? What is my TAFE provider meant to fund? What is NDIA meant to fund? So we developed a resource around getting the right support from the right people. So that's on our website. What I'll do is I'm going to send all these links, and hopefully if an email goes out to everybody at the end of the conference, you'll be able to access these resources. But getting the right support from the right people is a resource. It's actually in 8 sections, and there is a section for students who are blind or have a vision impairment. And it really unpacks, you know, if you are needing a note taker, who funds that? Well, the education provider does. But if you need support to get to learning, you know, orientation and mobility, to get to your university campus or your TAFE campus, NDIA needs to fund that. So it helps you unpack and work out what each of those, legislations and those big organisations are meant to be funding. So that's kind of been really useful for students to really unpack, how they manage and navigate that transition to tertiary education. One of the other new resources that we've developed, or 2 new resources, was in response to COVID. So many things, and it's great that everybody's there today in person, but campuses had to quickly move to online right around Australia. And we saw that students with disability, for some, it was absolutely game-changing in a positive way, that those students who may have mental health conditions such as anxiety or autism, you know, not having to kind of be at a class at a certain time, it actually kind of meant that they could grow in that online environment. But for some students, especially those who are blind and had a vision impairment, lecturers or teachers didn't really take into account how accessible the online environment was. So an example was, I know of a university that kind of got really excited and they brought this new technology for $10,000 that, you know, they could engage with their students really well online. But because it was under $10,000, their procurement process didn't ask the question, is this technology accessible to everybody? And so the students that were blind within that class were suddenly not able to participate on the same basis as other students. So we've developed guidelines that ultimately support the universities and vet providers to actually unpack what they need to think about when they're actually looking at an online delivery of their courses. So that goes through everything from making your Word documents accessible, making your PowerPoints accessible. I know that you've heard from Andrew Downing this morning, who's one of our big allies and has done lots of work for us and was a part of the development of those guidelines. So it's not targeted at students or at parents, but it's one of those resources as a student or a parent that you can pull out of your back pocket if you've got a lecturer or an academic or a teacher that's not necessarily supporting you the way that wants. Say, you know, these are the guidelines that can help you. Just even bringing up things like, you know, as you can see on the screen, or not talking to the PowerPoint fully and you haven't shared the PowerPoint prior. So there's some really good practice that you can do as an academic or teacher to ensure that your learning, online learning, is accessible as possible. So those guidelines are on our website, but along with the guidelines, we also developed e-learning, an e-learning resource. We have a number of e-learning resources that are available for everybody. They're all free. And one of those is around supporting students who are blind and vision impairment on the online environment. Those courses sit actually on a different website. So that's disabilityawareness.com.au. And on that, we have training for vet providers around supporting students with disability. We have training around universal design for learning. We have training around the blind students who are blind and vision impaired, the support. And we also have ones around support workers. So if you're working with a support worker to support you to, you know, be in education as independent as possible, there's e-learning there to help them understand what their responsibility as a support worker is as well. And then we just have a disability awareness course, which has actually been undertaken by 30,000 people around Australia. It's free. You know, we actually see some providers offering, I think we saw one the other day that was 65,000 for their course. It's like, oh my goodness. But ours is free. And it's just the first step in helping organisations understand disability and the context that actually disability sits with in Australia. So there, yeah, as I said, disabilityawareness.com.au, and they're all free. We also have them available in what's called a SCORM file, which people can actually in their own organisations download them to actually put into their own learning management systems. So we have universities and TAFEs around the country that have downloaded those files and made them mandatory for staff. So yeah, it's just, once again, we're just working really hard with the tertiary sector to ensure that it's accessible as possible. ADCET also provides some guidance for students in that journey to transition. So if you go onto our website and look under students with disability, you'll see a whole swagger of information, or you will be able to engage in a whole heap of information, such as what reasonable adjustments should you expect when you go to a TAFE or a vet provider or higher education? What happens if you get discriminated against, and what are the steps and processes that you need to take if you feel you've been discriminated against? Should you disclose? Even there's fact sheets there or templates there to work out how much money it's going to cost you. What's the difference between going to a vet provider and going to a higher education provider? So there's lots of information, a wealth of information. If there's something on the website you can't find, we are just an email away, and we will be working at developing them. We're always developing new content, new resources, new guidelines to support everybody to ensure that the tertiary sector is as accessible as everything. One of the other things that we've done recently too is we've got what we call AccessAbility Assist, and this is probably more for providers. So this is where we actually have a staff person available to actually unpack what accessibility, your online accessibility needs may be, and the technology. So similar to the conversation you've had with Andrew and others this morning around technology, Our person, Darren Britton, who when he came and got the job with us, he named his title, which was National Assistive Technology Officer, which is NATO. He's got a dry sense of humour, and he actually offers weekly one-on-one or a group session for tertiary providers to help unpack what the student may need or what their institution needs to do to ensure the technology needs of the student is met. And that's having a huge impact. So sometimes students come with technology, sometimes they don't. And sometimes it can be a game changer for people to be really kind of understand what the technology is. So yeah, look, I've talked for 10 minutes and I could talk for, I suppose you could all see, I could talk for hours on this subject, but I know that we'll get some really good questions and we can answer. I will share all those links that hopefully can get shared out to. I'm available, via email, and happy to share that too with the group today. And, we're really passionate to ensure that the journey to and the participation in tertiary education for students, and especially those with disability, including people who are blind and visual impairment, is as positive as possible. And we work really hard to do that. So I encourage you all to have a look at the website, provide feedback if it's, if there's something missing, and also provide feedback if it's good. So so I will finish up now and look forward to your questions at the end of the session. Thank you. Thanks, Michael.
Darlene.
I'm glad to be able to be here. As Darlene said, I know we'll get a lot of questions, and I think that's where the learning and the rich information comes from, more so than any of us as the talking head on the screen. But I'll give you 10 minutes or so of my knowledge, and then hopefully we'll open up to the floor and to Fred, and no question is off limits. It doesn't mean we'll know the answers, but we can take them away and come back once we've done some further investigation for you. So, as Michael said, I'm the Senior Manager of Student Accessibility and Support at the University of Newcastle. The team of advisors that I lead sit co-located within a wellbeing team. So we have counsellors, we have wellbeing advisors, we have accessibility advisors, which is the rebadged title for disability support. We have financial wellbeing, a great number of staff, but never enough, who help support the needs of our student population. In terms of disability, we probably have 2,000 plus students at the moment that we would be putting reasonable adjustments in place for, but to service that 2,000 plus students, unfortunately, I have 3 advisors. So we're always on the lookout for other ways to create opportunity for funding and support. And we realise the benefit that people with disability can bring to the education sector and then to the workforce. So to ensure that participation of students with disability is high and that success of students with disability is realised and that students are work ready is one of the things that the university is interested in. But the thing that my staff are interested in is, what does a student need to help them succeed? And what I would say to anyone who's thinking of coming to university is that it is not like school. And that's, for a lot of people, that's a really positive thing. That school there might have been certain stigma associated with school, or there might have been difficulties associated with school and engagement within that classroom setting. But university is different. It's an adult learning environment, and we will do as much as we can to support you to build capacity and be your own person. But what we need to do is, up front, you need to be known to us. So the most important thing is, if you are a prospective student, or if you have been made an offer is to make yourself known to the accessibility or disability support team at that particular university. We're already talking to prospective students for 2023 and looking at what's currently working well for them and what we might need to put in place for next year. We found that COVID, yes, it brought about some challenges, as Darlene said, but we found it brought people out of the woodwork. So people who might never have engaged with accessibility or disclosed disability, all of a sudden, because of COVID changes coming into the online environment, those students came to us and said, I need support. Some of them might have been around for 3 years, but hadn't been near us. So my message from that is, please come to us early, disclose disability either before enrolment or on enrolment. And the sooner you ask for support, the earlier those supports can be put in place. Now, the other thing I would say is that I'm speaking to an audience of experts, and students who have a vision impairment or are blind, I would think are the experts, and we can learn from you what works best and what has worked in the past for you, what may not have worked in the past, and now what we can try and support you with. So don't be afraid to help seek, but we will always try and advocate for you, give you the help you need, but we want to build that capacity and have you be able to succeed in your own right at university. As we know, people's conditions change, the environment around us changes, and so we also need to have continual conversations around, are these supports working? What is changing? And what might we do better? There is no wish list of, you are blind or vision impaired, therefore here are all the supports that you might be eligible for. It really is about you as the individual, how you work, what software you're used to using, what you're capable of doing. Are you enrolled in the right program or degree? Because that in itself is a challenge for any student. And I think we need to realise that there are things called inherent requirements, and they're the things that absolutely must be done within a course, whether it's because that course is registered through an accreditation body. It might be our engineering degrees that are all registered or accredited through Engineers Australia, or it might be one of the many health programs where you need to be able to be registered through APRA. So realistically, we would like to tell, or people with disabilities have often been told, you can do anything, but in some cases, not everything is achievable by a student with a disability, because those inherent requirements need to be met and we can't compromise the integrity of the course. That said, there are many reasonable adjustments that can be put in place to allow students to participate and succeed. I'm sure Andrew spoke to you this morning about all the different types of technology and supports that may be available. And any of you who are at school and currently being supported probably have your own preferences about what that learning looks like and how you're supported. Probably some of the difficult requests we've had, but nonetheless managed to provide, have been Japanese Braille, which has to go through a number of processes because of what our language looks like, what Japanese language looks like, and then who can actually support that by making Braille in that language. Music Braille was another one. So we have to be able to go outside and source someone who can provide us with these things. As Darlene said, once a student comes onto the university campus, there's an awful lot of things that then are the responsibility of the education provider. So yes, the NDIS might, moving on from Darlene's example, might be the ones who support you to get from home to university. But in the case of Newcastle, once you are on our campus, we have a mobility bus that would pick you up and be able to take you from one classroom to the next, and support you across campus, and sometimes within our campuses, because there's a couple of close ones for that to happen. But we always say to students, if you have your provider who puts into place orientation and mobility training for you, make sure that is done in the semester break or in the break between school and the commencement of uni, because some university campuses, such as Newcastle, are very expansive, and it's described as a bushland campus. And actually, it's really challenging to get around, regardless of vision or otherwise. It's challenging for lots of reasons. So I always say to students, if you're going to live on campus, you need that orientation and mobility training really early on. And even if you're not going to live on campus, it's about practicing that normal route from, whether it be the train station to the classroom or the classroom to the next classroom. We can provide participation assistance to help you in the classroom. My staff can do some initial meet and greet with academics and advocacy work, but it's having that time up front to allow us to do that. So we will be as timely as we possibly can, but it does rely on you making yourself known to us. I would also suggest to students that disclosure is a positive thing, but you need to think about what your disclosure story is and how you want to voice that to your academic. We would never write on someone's reasonable adjustment plan or documentation what their condition is, but we will be led by you as to what you are most comfortable with and how we can best support that. I'm a bit like Darlene. I can talk for quite a long time as well, but I think it's important that we get your questions and hear about what there is that you're curious about. So I will hand back over to Michael, and we'll invite Fred on board and Darlene back, and happy to take questions from the floor.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you, Fred, for joining. Education panel. So secondary to tertiary, but no holds barred. I like passionate people. If you've got questions, ask them. And as I said earlier, we've got a spectrum of experience here. And as we found before, if they don't have an answer, maybe someone else in the room will. We've got quite a wide variety of experience and skills in the room. Now, I may get things running with a question that's been pre-submitted. So let's start from the position of, are there certain pathways into university courses for the vision impaired student that we should know about? And the context from the person who asked, they've got a year 11 student who's starting to think about, oh, I've got some homework to do. So I know Fred had some early experience of this he shared.
Yeah, so when I enrolled to University of Newcastle, it wasn't so much for a disability sort of enrollment scheme. It was more so, in my experience, due to location, because I was in the Central Coast and live in the Central Coast. I actually had higher acceptance possibility due to living closer to the campus and also living in the Central Coast, since there is a campus there, being the Ourimbah campus. They actually allow you easy acceptance if you live within those regions. So that's kind of my sort of process of involvement.
And I suppose, Michelle, here, you'd have kind of the specifics about Newcastle. I'm sure you've learned about other institutions. When and how do you expect people to come and knock on the door? Is there a standard approach?
First of all, a student who might be thinking of coming to university needs to apply through the university's acceptance, through UAC, as part of that. Darlene, I've lost my train of thought.
That's fine. As part of that process
through
of
UAC
applying.
as part of the process, yeah. There is a thing called an educational assistance scheme, and as part of the educational assistance scheme, students with disadvantage, whether that disadvantage be illness, disability, financial hardship, domestic violence, where you live, so you come from a more rural and remote area, you will be given additional points during your final year, during your HSC, that will count towards you getting into university. So, but of course, there's documentation and there's questions that go with that. In terms of pathways, I think it's important to remember that not every student comes through a traditional pathway of having completed their HSC, having applied through UAC, and then coming into an undergraduate degree. So there are also foundation studies programs for those students who aren't necessarily as successful at their HSC as they would want to be, and they can do one of those programs and move into an undergraduate degree. The other thing is they can come through a tertiary, Darlene uses the word tertiary as all-inclusive. They can come through a vocational education pathway, and through completion of a TAFE course, may be offered acceptance into an undergraduate program. Universities are also now doing diploma programs in some disciplines. So if a student doesn't think they're necessarily ready for an undergraduate degree, then there are diploma programs as well. So there are a number of other, there's a schools recommendation scheme, there's a schools principal merit list, there's a number of other ways that students enter university, but you need to have that pathway sorted, and then, well, you can come and talk to us, but we're not the experts on admission.
I think with that question too, it goes to, is there any particular course? And there isn't. But one of the things that Michelle talked about earlier was the words inherent requirements. And so I think it's really important. It's kind of matching up your passion or your dream as what you want to do. Like it might be to be a lawyer, it might be to be a doctor, it might be to be a physiotherapist, whatever. And you actually have to kind of unpack that with what is also the inherent requirements of those courses to ensure that you can do it and what reasonable adjustments will need to be in place. You know, there are some things that, you know, maybe being a pilot and being totally blind, that may not be a possibility, but there may be other pathways, other things that are kind of related to the aero industry. Over time also, I'm now losing my thoughts. Careers, there may have been limited choices because there wasn't the technology to support somebody, but now with technology, you know, lots more pathways are open up for students who are blind or vision impaired. But it's really kind of really important to kind of find a good career advisor to actually have those conversations and contact the university or the vet provider early on to help kind of work out, what your dream and aspiration is with what the needs of the course is, and unpack that all together. So, but there's certainly not one pathway. And, you know, Michelle and I know many colleagues and students who have done a variety of roles from you know, being a lawyer to being a disability practitioner within the tertiary sector, and which Andrew may have spoken about this morning, one of his roles previously. So there's a huge amount of career opportunities, and you're going to hear from Naz this afternoon about her journey in being a journalist. So lots of great different pathways, but it's good to have the conversations and to kind of unpack that with your the provider that you're going to, the education provider you're going to.
Now, as we go, if you have a question, if you just start waiting straight away, that's okay. I'm going to follow my own little path because as a parent in this space, I can channel this pretty easily. So I can say as a parent of a child with vision impairment, it tends to put you in a mode of trying to be proactive. So I can say for myself, the idea of waiting for UAC scores before engaging with the official process fills me with terror. And I'd probably rather do it about 20 years earlier. So and I note that you did mention, for example, careers counsellors. I know we ask a lot of questions of our teachers, and we've got teachers here as well. So are there ways to engage earlier? So for example, if you're a parent, can you go and knock on the doors of the university or somewhere else to start talking 2 or 3 years in advance? And I suppose from a professional state, if you're a careers counsellor, is there institutional support for them to be able to knock on your doors, or as a teacher?
Certainly, any of those. So we will often engage with teachers, careers counsellors, prospective students, parents. I don't quite know about 3 years out, but but definitely 12 months out, and anywhere between 6 to 12 months. I think Darlene's right. The advice that you need, first of all, is based on the inherent requirements of the course. So we might do things like refer you to our website where there might be there are inherent requirements listed, or refer you to an academic in that area that teaches that course. For example, we had someone a blind student enroll in aeronautical engineering. It was just too dangerous. I mean, that's the other thing. You've got to assess risk, and you don't want to put people at danger. So, yeah. I understand that parents do want to be proactive, but yeah, I think a lot of that comes from the careers counsellors at school initially, back through to the student. But Darlene, I don't know, you might want to pick up on that.
It's not even like, even in those initial discussions too, it might be about finding what I know that work experience is an opportunity for people, but there are lots of things that happen within universities now that actually support pathways into university, like for the year 10, year 11 and 12, that might, tasting things like, so I've got an example here in Tasmania where we had a student 3 years ago who was blind, who was interested in the forensic science pathway. So she came on a taster day. So, the university then had to work with her to actually help her, participate in that day as well as everybody else, as like everybody else on the equal paying field. So that kind of prepared the university for her journey in some way. So even engaging in what the universities are doing for all students in making decisions. So going to the open day, 3 years out, is a really reasonable thing to do. Most open days would have the support teams there to have those conversations. So you can start with little things. You don't need to say, okay, year 10 and my daughter's going to be a lawyer and I need these supports. It's actually just about going into the tasters, going into experience some of the things, and some of those questions that you've got will maybe get eased. But also, just a plug for our website too, there is lots of information to help you feel a little bit better about that pathway and what supports are available as well. But we also do encourage, and in that guideline I spoke around the NDIA and what the tertiary provider will offer, there's kind of identifies, that it is good, depending on what you're studying, about letting the university or TAFE know you're coming, before, because it's no use rocking up if you're a student who is blind and rocking up the day that every other student comes and says, I'm blind and I need my, all my learning in this format. The university takes a while to get prepared. And so it is really important to actually look at, that pre-contacting, so that the university can prepare. So on that first day, you are like all the other students, because your material's accessible, the technology's there, the academics know your needs and understand that through, receiving a learning access plan. So that's really important to also, make sure you do engage early, but probably, the 3 years versus the 6 months or a year. But we do actually identify that in the course. On our website, we've actually got quite a powerful video from Graham Innes, where he talks about his initial time when he started his education journey in tertiary education. And he got really behind because the university didn't do what they were meant to do. And he ended up having to get the material, formatted for himself, by himself, and catching up within, the weekends and the semester break, because he got so behind because he wasn't able to access the material. We hope that doesn't happen as much these days, But the thing that you can do to ensure it doesn't is make sure you make contact early and that the service is aware of what your needs are.
And Fred, from your side, you have very recently been walking the walk. And so this pathway is a path that you have trodden. As the consumer of the pathway, how did you find it? Was it well laid? Was it obvious exactly what you needed to do? Did it just take some of those self-advocacy skills? Were there clear roadmaps?
Yeah, I feel like it was a very clear roadmap from beginning to end during my degree. I never really had any problems with, seeking the help that I needed or, finding the places in which I should find the support, both, physically where like I have to have to get a shuttle to one place or the other or for extended time, but also for mental support and looking for, counseling advice and all that sort of thing. That stuff is always very clearly laid out in the University of Newcastle. I always had access and support where I needed it whenever I came to my pathway through my university life.
That is an excellent transition to the next question. Oh, wait, let's do something live.
My question is, what happens when the best laid plans don't go to plan? For example, our team supported a student last year who was very, very academic. She ended up with a 99.95 legally blind. And the university promised that her materials would all be supplied to her either in Braille where necessary or electronically. And she's doing, it's a combined degree, it's law and politics, I think. And unfortunately, she was let down time and time again this year in the first semester. Fortunately, she is a very good advocate and studying law is the right pathway for her. But I'm thinking of lots of other students that I have and have in the past supported who don't have her advocacy skills. What happens for those students? What's the recourse for them when the materials aren't there when they need to be?
I suppose there's many reasons why things do go wrong, why the best laid plan doesn't work. And sometimes it's access to people who can, like if a university's got, I'm not making excuses, I'm just being realistic here. If a university has to outsource a job because they don't produce their own Braille, sometimes it's such a scarce resource that yes, a student does get behind and things aren't done in a timely manner. And then it's up to the, in the case of Newcastle, it would be up to the advisor that's working with the student to negotiate with the academics around extensions, what additional time this student can have to complete, exactly what we can do in terms of something that might be an alternate assessment to still allow that student not to get too far behind because they haven't got necessarily what they need. It's a case-by-case basis, and as I said, don't want to make excuses, but sometimes it is really difficult. And I know that people we've approached and employed before who might work for Department of Education, they might do work for us in their own time in terms of materials into accessible formats. And there's very few people. It's like Auslan interpreters, they all get booked up by the same organizations, by the same students and people, and they're hard to access. So it's just another form of disability support where we haven't got enough resource for the need.
And look, it's difficult. There are, as Michelle said, many different reasons, and it is disappointing when we hear those stories from students, because we know that there's, very passionate people within universities that are trying to work and make the barriers less, but we do come across those barriers occasionally. Certainly, and, as you said, with the student, she's going to go to the great, the job of being a great lawyer, and hopefully she'll work in the disability discrimination area and kind of help other people in that may have experienced what she has. But that self-efficacy, what we when we can give our students the empowering tools to advocate for themselves. And I know it's very frustrating if you're a disability or if you're a person with a family member of somebody with disability, that you have to continue to advocate, you have to continue to fight, but they are really powerful skills to have. And so we on ADCET have a page which we wish we didn't have to have, but if you have a complaint, we actually have a template to support a student to actually go through the process to kind of take the emotion out of not getting what you need, but actually really kind of structure the complaint process with the university or the vet provider, because it does occasionally happen. And, I'd like to, be able to say that in an ideal world it doesn't. But, at times you have to get to that. The challenge with Australia is, and this is being really honest with everybody, we do have a broken legislation. We've got the Disability Discrimination Act, and what sits under that is the Disability Standards and Education Act. And, as education providers, universities and vet and, your schools are meant to provide an equal playing field for everybody, an equal, put students on the same basis, students with disabilities on the same basis as their peers. But if you don't do that as an education provider, the student or the parent are the ones that actually have to raise it. It's not like I'm not wearing a seatbelt and the police officer is going to come along and charge me because I'm not wearing my seatbelt. The legislation doesn't work like that. And so in some ways it's broken because it means you as a student or you as a family member have to keep fighting. Hopefully in 10 years, I won't have to say those stories, because we will actually have a legislative framework that actually works in favour of the student. And it's not this David and Goliath that, David doesn't win in this situation. But you do have legislation behind you. You do have like a template. There are really strong advocates out there. There are legal firms that support students with disability in their advocacy and their discrimination claims. But also feel free to contact, ADCET, where, we often kind of just provided, not individual advice, but we do kind of provide some links and so forth to help you on that journey. But what we're trying to do, and I know the federal government have been really committed. They've just reviewed the disability standards about a year ago. They do that every 5 years. And what they do is try to inform the sector of their responsibility. They haven't changed the legislation, but what we're doing is saying it's illegal. You need to provide the student with the documentation in, reasonable time and so forth. Just the other thing, it is a challenge around the Braille too. Like, I know that some students really have that preference of Braille or have that preference of large print out. The challenge with going from school to a tertiary environment. So if you actually are studying law, for example, if a university had to print everything off in large print for you or put it all into Braille, it just couldn't be done. The reality is, to be an independent learner, I really encourage you to find technology that enables you to be more and more independent, because the reality is you need to go and find new journals. You need to go and find, yourself. Yeah, you're on a journey yourself to actually also develop your knowledge through finding other things. So yeah, to rely on everything to be in Braille is just unrealistic at that academic in that tertiary level, because the amount of reading, the amount of material is given is a big ask for any university to do. So I don't know if that's a fair thing, is it, Michelle?
It is because we'd be providing textbooks to students in electronic form, and then a student would be using a screen reader with that. It's not a timely practice in terms of when you are, if we're looking at developing work-ready graduates, it's not a timely practice for that technology, for Braille to be used in a workplace setting. So yes, there might be a mixture of ways we support a student. It's not you can't have it. It's just, it would be best if we looked at this. And we're teaching new technologies to students, and we're learning new things ourselves all the time, because as we all know, technology changes so quickly.
In other words, the mathematics degree isn't looking encouraging.
Well, there is.
There are.
Assistive technology to support in math. So, and that's what I mean. Things are changing, dramatically. Sorry, Michelle.
I was going to say there's a piece of software called Equasio. I'm far from a mathematician, but yes, that will support maths. I've got students who are blind doing maths, but unfortunately we've had to sit participation assistance with some of them because that's the most timely way to go. But math is difficult for a blind student, yes, absolutely.
So if I try and see if I sum up the answer to your original question. So I suppose answer number one, if it all goes wrong and you're not getting what your entitlement is first of all, there's an escalation pathway within the institution.
Yes.
Second of all, I think Darlene said ADCET has got an outside of institution pathway you can follow that'll help you find the right advocate. Thirdly, there are laws. So the law is on your side, but they're not well written, and it needs to be mostly initiated by you as an individual rather than kind of the legal resources coming in and poking sticks at the institution themselves. But the laws are at least there. Let's hope an improvement. And it sounded like also being almost obsessively pre-prepared and asking for things early becomes almost like a habit. And I'm interested, Fred, if any of your reflections you've got there about pre-preparation or how easy it is to know what services are there to provide. Because you did say that there were services available that you were aware of, that you were able to provide.
When you go to university, there is an orientation day and open days in which they bring you through everything that you're gonna be doing. Like, for example, you'll start like in a lecture hall, they'll talk about what, services you have access to, what sort of like, expectations there are in the university of how to attend class, what classes to attend and all that. And they even, walk you through labs. They'll be like, here's the labs that if you'll be doing this sort of course, like for example, chemistry, like you'll be doing stuff in these sort of labs. If you, be doing this, be expected that you'll be at these sort of places, these sort of labs. And then it'll be like, if you need, support, whether it be career, financial, mental, physical support, you can always have those avenues that you can access in order to, see a therapist or have access to career advice or financial advice. And I would say that's pretty much, the best sort of thing that applies to that is that in my experience.
Fantastic. I've got okay. Let's get them.
Yeah, I'm coming.
Go. Action in the room.
Hi, just some courses require students to go out on placement. So what assistance does the university, can the university give to that student while that student is out on placement? So for a vision impaired person on placement, they walk into an environment where they can't see anything. Is it up to them to figure out everything that's going on, or does the university have a duty to give them assistance in those cases?
With students, but not necessarily blind and vision impaired students, there could be any number of reasons why a student might need to visit a placement site prior to placement. So we would support, well, for example, I'm going to a placement site next Tuesday with a student who has a spinal cord injury, and we're going to look at the accessibility of the placement site, do a risk assessment, talk to the school about what this student's needs are, and then look at what adjustments will need to be made in terms of access to space, in terms of shorter days, in terms of breaks, etc. The other thing is, in terms of orientation and mobility training in that workplace, I would be thinking that a student would need to arrange that with whoever normally provides that orientation and mobility training. as part of something up front. So we would have a placement meeting with a student, with the placement coordinator and potentially with the placement site to see how we best supported the student. I'm trying to think of what sorts of placement, probably placement for teaching, placement for social work would be the two that I can see a blind student may be involved in, but we know that there's a big push towards work integrated learning, and that by 2023, all of our newly commencing students will be expected to participate in some form of work integrated learning. So that in itself is going to provide additional challenges for students with disability.
And as part of that, I'm going to opportunistically try to complete a circle here, because I'm very aware that there was a question earlier today, which was admittedly in the context of the secondary or primary schooling system, about kind of willingness of providers to go into educational facilities, or maybe being blocked, or unwillingness at educational facilities. Now, although I know this is a tertiary, but it'd be interesting just, have you got any awareness whether it's going out into a placement, or whether it's bringing specialist providers into your facilities, or from the ADCET side, a great variety of facilities, of there being kind of legal impediments, privacy impediments to these providers, whether it's orientation, mobility, whether it's any other form, being blocked or supported by the law or process in being able to enter and assist?
We would we would encourage that to happen, because we can't provide the resource and support. So I know that there are a number of blind students who in each semester break will look at what classes they're enrolled in for the next semester, and someone from Guide Dogs will come on to campus, and they will travel those routes with them for however long it takes for that to happen. In terms of students with high care needs, the university is not responsible for providing personal support. So those students also need someone to come onto campus with them. Some students with mental health conditions might have a support worker who comes and sits in the classroom with them. Fine. We ask that the student disclose to us that they just don't turn up with this person. But in some cases, for example, if someone's orientating a student to student living to live on campus, we may have that person do an orientation to the university as a contractor to come on board, just to ensure they're safe. So no, nothing should be an impediment to those people, to any of those support services accessing the university.
Yeah, it's about that open communication, I suppose, and that coordination. I understand, like, you know, especially with the introduction of NDIA and often some of the specialist service within schools, like, you know, you used to have a vision impairment teacher, or you had the physiotherapist that was employed by the education department, and now you have NDIA funded physiotherapists that want access to the student in class, you know, in class, and probably have less likely opportunity of that happening within the tertiary environment. But, you know, it is, like some universities and vet may have a signing form just for OC health and safety. So if you are a student who requires a support person to come with you, there may be some paperwork that needs to be completed for OC health and safety purposes. But, you know, most universities, especially lecture theatres are open. Anybody can go and sit in a lecture theatre and be, you know, have your philosophy 101 kind of into your brain. So, you know, campuses are very much open to the general public and in that way for those supports. But I did mention that we do have training for support workers, and these are some of the challenges. Like with the introduction of the insurance scheme, there were a lot more people coming onto campus, which was great, with significant disabilities, and then would bring, you know, have support with them. But sometimes those support workers not necessarily, you know, kind of act in the way that they should, like, you know, having an argument with a lecturer, example, and, you know, they're meant to be there as a support person, not participating in the class. And so this is why we've developed this training resource to ensure that the support workers and people that are with a person with disability understand the nuanced life of university and how they're meant to work.